This is section 3-1, trig derivatives. In this section, we're going to learn how to take the derivatives of various trig functions. So let's start off with our basic sine wave. So we got f of x is equal to sine x. If we remember that when we're taking the derivative is simply the slope of the graph, okay? So there are some key points on the graph of sine x. Notice right there the slope is 0. Right here the slope is 0. Right here the slope is positive. Then it's negative. Then it's positive. So if we look at that and see what the derivative is going to look like as a graph, we'll see something here. Notice the blue line is sine x. The red line corresponds to the derivative. Notice at every place that sine x is a max or a min, the red line is a 0. And notice as the slope of the blue line is going up, the red line is positive. As the slope is going down, the red line is negative. And if you look at that closely, the derivative of sine x is simply cosine x. So let's look at the cosine function, okay? Again, we've got a 0 slope there, a 0 slope there, and a 0 slope there, okay? And the slope here is negative, the slope here is positive. So let's see what that looks like. Again, the blue line corresponds to cosine x. The red line corresponds to the derivative. Now notice every place cosine x is a max or a min, the red line is 0. And also how that as the slope of the blue line is going down, the red line is negative. As the slope of the blue line is going up, the red line is positive. Well, what does that graph look like? Well, it isn't exactly sine x because sine x starts off at 0, 0 and goes up. This starts off at 0, 0 and goes down. So if you look at it closely, the derivative of cosine x is simply minus sine x. All right, so let's look at some examples here. In each of these cases, we want to find the derivative. So our first example here is going to be f of x is equal to cosine 3x. So instead of thinking of this as cosine 3x, let's say 3x is u. So we've got cosine u. So what is the derivative of cosine u going to be? Well, the derivative of cosine u is simply going to be minus sine u. But remember, chain rule says it's minus sine u times u prime, okay? So derivative of cosine u is minus sine u, u prime. So going back to the original example, what would our answer be? So derivative of cosine 3x would be minus sine 3x times the derivative of 3x, which is simply 3. Or we could rewrite this as minus 3 sine 3x. So let's look at another example here, where we've got f of x is equal to sine squared x. Now, we may want to rewrite this, and I think it will help us to figure out what the derivative is. So if we rewrite this as being parentheses sine x squared, okay, this is, again, you can think of this as being u squared, and use the chain rule, and we can figure out what the derivative comes out to be. So using the chain rule, we simply take the exponent here and bring that out front. Derivative of sine is cosine. I'm sorry. So we take the exponent, bring it out front. So it's 2 times sine to 1 less. So this is actually 1 right here, but we're not going to write it as 1. Times the derivative of what's inside, which is cosine. So again, sine x squared is 2 sine x to the power of 1 times the derivative of sine x, which is cosine x, or the derivative is simply 2 sine x cosine x. So let's look at a more complicated one. Here we've got f of x is equal to 4 cosine cubed 2x. All right, first thing I want to do is rewrite that. So using brackets, I've got 4 bracket cosine 2x bracket to the 3rd power. Okay, again, I'm going to use chain rule and figure this out. So we're going to take the exponent, which is 3, bring it down here. So it's going to be 4 times 3. This raised to the 1 less, so now instead of being 3, it's going to be 2 times the derivative of what's inside here. Well, the derivative of what's inside is minus sine 2x, but then we got to take the derivative of 2x, so that is 2. So this could be rewritten fair. They could leave it as is. That's perfectly correct. But I could also rewrite it. And rewritten, this would look like 2 times 4 times 3, which is 24. We got the minus sign here. This is cosine squared 2x times sine 2x. So a little bit better way of writing it rather than the first way is simply to simplify it and write it this way. Now you might ask, what are the derivatives of the other 4 trig functions? Well, this is a table here of showing all the trig functions. And we talked about derivative of sine and derivative of cosine. Now, we could derive these by changing tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent to be sine and cosine and using various laws of derivatives. But I'm just showing you this for your own purposes. We are basically only going to be concerned, however, with sine and cosine. But this does show you what the other derivatives are for tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent.